Hey everyone, welcome back to the Incognito Mode podcast. I'm Ava Jones, and today we're doing something a little different. This episode is split into two parts because honestly, this conversation was too good to cut down. I sat down with Skye King, a behavioral scientist and the founder of Geode Lifeworks, and we talked about something I think we all feel but don't always name. Burnout. Not the I need a vacation kind, the systemic, structural, this is how we build the system kind. Skye works with tech leaders and organizations to redesign how we work so people don't break in the process. And let me tell you, this conversation went deep. We're talking about why rest feels like failure, why hustle culture is a trap, and what it actually takes to build companies that don't run on fumes. So, buckle up. This is part one of the Burnout Economy, Understanding the System. Let's get into it. Okay, so Skye, I'm very glad that you're here, especially given everything you've got going on right now. I'm sure this topic hits hard. I have been very ready to have this conversation. Before we dive in, and don't worry, we're going to get into both of our kind of current struggles with maybe burnout or taking time for ourselves.
Love it.
Before we dive in, I do have a quick question.
Sure.
Just to kind of break everyone in here. On a scale from caffeinated to comatose, how burned out would you say the tech industry is right now?
Oh, goodness. I'm going to give it at least 4 cups of coffee a day. I think we're pretty close to at least all of the people I talk to and a lot of the events. Obviously, burnout is always top of mind for me. And I don't think I could tell you someone I haven't talked to that isn't displaying the signs of burnout. And I talk to a lot of people and go to a lot of different events. So pretty high.
Oh, God. High rating. Do not recommend. Okay.
Yeah, I would say it's pretty high. And I can share these later if you want, but there are actually some statistics around that too, in terms of just, like Calm had a report where they're talking about more than half of employees feel like they always have to be available. They always have to work outside office hours or regular times. And yeah, this is just a recipe for burnout.
100% it is. We will definitely get into that. I think that's very real. I think all of us feel that. So something I've been thinking about, so I'm calling this episode The Burnout Economy, Understanding the System.
Yeah.
Because it feels like exhaustion has become like this weird badge of honor in tech. And if you're not running on fumes, you're not committed enough. So before we get into the science of that, I'm curious, and I'm sure everyone listening is curious too, what made you want to study burnout, and what are you noticing most in your clients or research right now?
I love this question. I think part of the reason I'm so passionate about helping individuals and organizations to, develop the leadership skills, the policies and practices, and those types of things that, instead of having that burnout hustle culture, actually create what I call a regenerative thriving culture, is because I've seen the negative impacts that burnout has had on me, on people I've worked with, on clients I've worked with, and others. And if I could give you just a very short story,
Sure.
The reason I started Geode Lifeworks was because back about 5-6 years ago, I was working with a client, and I had a whole team of people I was working with, and we had a client that was moving toward an IPO for their startup. And we had been working for months on the investor deck and all the materials and other things like that. And things came to a head where sort of the weekend before they were going on their roadshow, Ava, the banking group they were working with had some changes. And my most of my team was not available that weekend. There was sort of only one person available. And she and I both worked more than 40 hours over one weekend. And so that's, upwards of 20 hours a day trying to, push this out. And this is after months of sort of steady, intense work, nights, weekends, all of that. And got everything to them. They IPO'd for $1 billion, like wildly successful. But that experience broke me. And it was not just the time and the energy and the, just exhaustion after that. It was also because during that weekend, I had infringed on one of my most important personal values, which is kindness. And I had been unkind to the one person who was helping me out in that crazy weekend. And I was like, that's it. Threw up my hands. I'm like, I can't do this again. I had been burned out in the past, but this was just the apex of things, infringing on one of my most personal, important values. So I did a big shift after that. And probably about 3-4 months later, started Geode Lifeworks, because I never want anyone else to have to go through that level of intensity, exhaustion, infringing on their, important values. I want them to have the skills and resources and tools they need to be in a healthier environment.
That makes sense.
It's a lot. Maybe that was a long story.
No, actually that was really good. And it made me think. I was sitting here thinking as you were talking, I'm like, what's really interesting about that is I think about the hackathon culture, right? Mm-hmm. And though you're not obviously pushing toward an IPO, I hope, at a hackathon.
Not yet. You never know, I guess.
But the correlation, quickly. But yes. So the correlation there is like, you look around the room, and especially when you have those lock-ins.
Yeah.
And you see these people that literally are spending 10, 12, 15, 20 hours. That's crazy to me, by the way. And they're working on this project, and they're like literally sleeping in the room, and they're like, everyone's ordering pizza, and it's crazy. And that's something that was new to me, obviously moving to the Bay, but I have been involved in a few now just to kind of get the vibe and see what it was like. And
yeah,
I felt burned out just from, mind you, it was great. It was a great time. I had a lot of fun. I think I did very well and I learned a lot, but my God, I'm like, dude, imagine trying to actually get a startup off the ground. Mm-hmm. You just have this 24 to 48 hour period where you're just like, okay, everyone just lock in literally. Like you can't leave. Like,
yeah.
I can't imagine.
The door is locked.
Yeah.
The pizza is sus. Yeah. It's, well, I'm not saying that, there aren't times to have those sprints or work hard or do that. I mean, we know with startups and with a lot of the tech companies, you have times where you're going to need to crunch. There's a, product launch coming up, or you're trying to meet a milestone. I think what, and we were designed, or we, from a physiological standpoint, are equipped to have those shorter or short-term bursts of intensity and focus and things like that. But what happens, and I think this is pervasive in the tech culture and this sort of burnout economy we've created, is that you never actually see in a lot of places that time for rest or that time for regrouping in order to be able to do that again. And that's where we get into, sort of what chronic stress and how that leads to, burnout, which is really where you have those, unmanaged workplace pressures, and it's not just about some stress, Ava, we all have that. And actually the science shows some stress is a good thing, right? That can be helpful for us.
Right.
But what we're talking about here, I think, is more of a systemic dysfunction we see across a lot of these organizations. It's not about us as individuals. It's about, how we operate in this modern world. And that's the part that's really challenging, is we do have this hustle culture. And there are elements of that can be advantageous in the short term. And when you're, pursuing, something that's highly competitive. But we need to be able to build in the rest and recovery we need to have that sort of long-term ability to adjust and grow and continue moving on. Because otherwise you're just burning everybody out. And, that manifests itself in a lot of other things I think organizations don't want.
Yeah. No, I actually love that because you just did a natural segue, because literally my next question is getting right into the meat of that topic.
Okay.
So my next question that I had, and this is just something that I've been thinking about. I mean, I've been thinking about it for a while, but I'm going to tell a personal story that maybe I shouldn't tell, but I'm going to do it anyway because I'm a
Do it. I love it.
So I was watching an interview one day, and of course it was a tech interview. Skye knows me well enough at this point, I think, to know that if I say I was watching an interview, it was likely a tech interview.
I had my hunch that this is where we were going, Ava.
So I'm watching a tech interview, and I will not name names, but the individual at hand, the question was posed about rest, right? And the response was, yeah, I couldn't tell you because I haven't slept in like 4 or 5 years.
Oof.
And said with a very blank face too. And mind you,
wow,
this is a pretty big tech company. So I'm sitting there and I'm like, oh my, that's really not good. So it got me to thinking, you're looking at someone that's pretty much at or near the top of that level. And then you're looking down at people that are like, junior devs or whatnot, and everyone's saying the same thing. And so my question became, when did burnout shift from like a crisis to just being the cost of having a tech career? It's like, in order to have a notable tech career, it's almost like the burnout is a requirement.
I mean, I think the root of this, for sure, is that the system we've created rewards that overwork, right? And I get it, right? I used to do those 80+ hour weeks, was working with a lot of startup, early stage companies, tech companies, others, and we would brag to each other when we'd be out for drinks, which was one of our coping mechanisms. Yep. Like it was this big badge of honor. And I think that this really did grow out of, the startup urgency, some of the venture capital demands, and those sort of desires for hyper growth. And on one hand, Ava, I really get it. There is that, business desire. You do need those short-term bursts to launch a product, stay competitive, but the challenge is that we, as I was saying earlier, we're not designed for that sort of constant stress and action. And what I've been worrying about is that a lot of founders and a lot of leaders within startups and those sort of early stage companies bring that ethos as their companies grow. And that's, I think, where we see this kind of perpetual focus on, that burnout hustle culture. And while that might work in the short term, let's say a year or less, when you're, within a given quarter, when you're really pushing towards something, what the research shows is that in the long term, that's actually destructive in terms of it decreases creativity, decreases innovation, decreases all of these things. And I got to be honest, and I know I mentioned this to you earlier, I'm really worried about some of the murmurings I've heard about the 996 expectations that are coming out of China. That makes me very worried. And for your listeners, if you don't know what that is, in China, they talk about working, 9 a.m. to 9 p.m., 6 days a week. And this is why we see not just burnout, but people actually dying from those conditions. And there are all kinds of things that, stress the body in that way. So I think one of the hopes I had, especially in the early days of talking about, AI, and I know AI goes back many, many years, but let's say even just, a few years ago to the promise of some of the Gen AI tools, there was this vision that we would have greater productivity for less effort. And what I'm seeing, and there was this hope, maybe we'll move to a 4-day week and, we can chat about that, but what I'm actually seeing when I talk to people in the Bay Area and beyond is that it's just put us all in a pressure cooker. For example, I think there was a study came out by Lead Dev this year that found that 38% of tech workers are actually working longer hours this year, and only 7 are working less. So those promises of AI reduce, like I heard in so many meetings and meetups and hackathons and stuff over the years, oh, we're going to use AI to reduce the toil in our jobs, and it's going to give us a little more breathing room. What I'm seeing is actually the opposite. And we didn't just normalize burnout, we productized it and made it, you're right, a rite of passage as well as an expectation. And I'm here to say it doesn't have to be that way. And the research doesn't actually support that in terms of, the long-term growth, longevity, and health of a company. So we don't need to be grinding our teams into the dust to get successful products in companies. Again, a little bit different, right? Early days, startup, that kind of stuff. Like there is a time and a place for that push. 100%. But I really feel like people bring that, because it worked in those early days, into their companies as they grow. And that just isn't supported by evidence in terms of it working. So
I would agree with you. Yeah, it's odd too, because like, I think the one thing that maybe people didn't consider when we had these talks about how, Gen AI was going to free up so much, and what I don't think anyone can considered, at least maybe on a larger scale, is how they like say more money, more problems. Well, more AI, more oversight. So the more AI you have, the more human oversight is required. So I don't know if anyone put those two factors together, but it's like, you can't say you're going to have all this explosive AI and think you're actually going to work less hours, because you need more people to actually oversee the AI that you are now implementing. So it's interesting that little ricochet effect didn't factor into the plans, but
well, and it sort of baffles me too, because if you look at, different advances in the tech industry, and we would talk about this, years ago, Ava, like, shit data in, shit data out, right? Yep. When data was like all the rage. And what, if AI is speeding up systems that already aren't working, or that don't have good workflow, or aren't using best practices, you're just creating more of a muddle around things. So it's not surprising, I think, to me or others who have lived through like the big data. It feels a little bit like Groundhog Day, to be honest. Yeah. Like, it's like, well, of course. And it's interesting because a couple of years ago, I did an executive program through MIT that was focused on AI and business strategy. And we talked about it there. That was part of the coursework, was about how you have to be strategic in your use of AI. It's not just about putting it everywhere. It's about identifying what the real challenges are that we're trying to solve for people, and then being thoughtful about how we identify and implement. And, one of the big things for me is all about the change management you need. And I will say, Ava, you're so on target. People have not considered the sort of cultural shift and focus you need in order to even have adoption of these tools. And especially in the tech industry, I feel like what's that saying? They're eating their own lunch, or they're, I know I'm not saying it right, but
I like that one actually.
They're a tech company, and so many of these tech companies are also using and optimizing different AI tools as a part of their business to help speed things. But if we haven't done enough thought about the human element and the workflows and how people are actually going to use and deploy whatever tool it is, whether it's AI or whether it's some new productivity framework you're deploying, or whether it's, a new system you have within your organization, if we haven't thought enough about the human element, it is going to make more work for people. And people are stressed out by change anyway. So Correct. It's just going to make it worse. And I just, it breaks my heart to see the promise not delivered that we all hoped for, at least in a lot of the pockets and things we hear on the news. Now, you and I have been to a lot of these other conversations around in the Bay Area where there are companies that are focused on, tools, even using AI to help with well-being and burnout and mental health and physical activity and other things like that. So I do think there are pockets of the promise, but I'd love to see us shine a little bit more light on those instead of things like the 996, expectation that's coming to people that, I mean, I have a couple of coaching clients and others that this is terrifying for them because they are already overwhelmed and overworked and, working through their own personal burnout. And I always say, like, it's not just about what you can do personally. It's about those systems that we need to change and explore and see how we can create an environment and an ecosystem that supports all of us to be the best versions of ourselves, right? To be productive, to be creative, to be innovative.
I would definitely agree. It's interesting how I think what we did, before I segue, it's interesting. I was considering that we did it backwards. We did all of the AI, all of the things, everything all at once. And then we did the infrastructure after. And it's really? Like, is that really what we should have done? Probably not.
The infrastructure has been broken in a lot of places for a long time. I mean, just talk to a product manager at a tech company and who's been there for a while. I mean, AI is making their job even harder. So, and that's why there's great groups like, there was a workshop I know a couple of friends went to that was around AI for product management. And there they were talking about some of those challenges and how they can implement things in a different way that actually don't exacerbate challenges they already have. And to your earlier point, Ava, like actually make more work for them. So and I get it. In the upfront time, it might take a little bit more time and effort. It's like any new behavior that somebody's going to adopt. It takes time to build that muscle memory and to, get over a lot of the cognitive biases that we all have to kind of get to that state. But yeah, if we're just making bad systems faster, and we don't see all the things happening, like it just makes me so I call myself a rebel optimist. That would be kind of the place where I need to exercise my optimism the hardest. Is how can we overcome that and use the best practices and tools we know to help doing that? Because I see, and to like move things a little bit back to the burnout part, when we look at companies, and thinking about burnout of their teams and whatnot, what I see that just kind of makes my heart sad is that burnout is often positioned as that personal flaw instead of that more systemic problem.
Yes.
And that is, and we can talk about that more if you want, but it's misaligned, and I think it's why I loved the title you proposed around the burnout economy. Is it just exacerbates those challenges that have been within companies for decades.
It's wild because and honestly, yes, we will get there because that is one of my questions. I'm so glad you went there. I'm sitting here rubbing my hands together, but I was wondering about something.
Yeah,
and this is a really good one. We kind of touched on this, or you just started to.
Okay.
I'm curious from your perspective, what's the one thing that you wish tech leaders understood about burnout right now? If you had to boil it down to one thing, what would it be? Because I think a lot of the problem that we're seeing is, if I'm quite honest, and I don't want to throw any particular company under the bus, so I guess I won't, but I think there's a lot of, I'm just going to say platitudes around, we understand that, our teams are burned out and we understand wellness and we really get it about work-life balance. But when you look at the structure, the internal structure of these tech companies, and I'm just going to point at the Bay as a glaring example, but it's not just the Bay, it's American culture in general. But
absolutely.
In the Bay, I think
it's on steroids in the Bay, but
well, there's a lot of talk about understanding it, but I really don't think we do understand as leaders. So what's the one thing you'd want them to get?
I would say if your team is burned out, that's a reflection on you.
100%.
And I think, a lot of companies, I think, position burnout as a personal failing, or people internalize it that way because, quite frankly, Ava, it's cheaper and more comfortable for them to do that. Doing something like, I would call it sort of performative well-being, like offering a meditation app, that's easier for them
Yep.
than redesigning their workload expectations or thinking about their leadership blind spots. Or when somebody gets burned out and needs some time, you see people posing questions like, why weren't you resilient enough? Or, why couldn't you, just bear through this, instead of focusing on, well, what were the warning signs we ignored? And as someone who's been in those leadership meetings and you look at, usability reports and you see the output of projects and things like that, one of the things I really appreciated with the organization I was with most recently is we didn't just look at areas where people had capacity, but we looked at areas where people were over 80% capacity as well. And then I, as a manager, would be able to go and have a conversation and say, well, I'm noticing there's not a lot of buffer room here for, the other activities you have. Can you tell me a little bit more about your workload? Can we talk about some of these other areas? And, we also know there's even great research out of Stanford that talks about, after 50 hours a week, productivity drops significantly. And, there's even other studies that say even above 30 hours a week, you get really huge drops in productivity and creativity and whatnot. But the fact that we're still glorifying these 60-hour weeks and we tell people to quote, self-care their way out of burnout, I think it's emotional gaslighting, Ava. I mean, I really do.
Oh my God.
It is.
No, I'm laughing because not only are you 100% right, but if I could, I'll tell you a really quick story, and I was not going to share this, but I literally had an interaction today, a personal one, that now I'm going to share because you just said it and now I have to. So
do it. I'm excited.
So I was talking to someone earlier. I will leave the platform and the nature of the conversation completely anonymous. But what I will say is, this is someone I had never spoken to before. Okay. And the conversation started with a statement made by this other person about, oh, so it seems like you give a lot to other people and you have a lot going on, but, what do you do? Like, do you do any self-care? And my response to that was, oh, well, yeah, I definitely take time, for myself. And, I make sure that I do this and do that. And I'm listing off these things. Mind you, I'm sitting here going, I don't know why I'm justifying this to someone I don't know that well. But anyway, I felt the need to say it, right? And after I said it, the other person's like, oh, okay, so are you pretty much just kind of patting yourself on the back through? And I'm like, what? I'm like, no.
Whoa.
Right. I'm like, wait a minute. I'm like, so wait, how do you define self-care? I'm asking them, because for me, I feel like self-care is a very personal thing, and the way that you go about self-care is really indicative of where you, what stage you're at in life, what you have going on, all of your commitments. And so what I'm laughing about now is that I literally just went through watching someone in real time kind of shoot down someone else's, i.e. mine. They
were yucking your yum? What's up with that? That's terrible.
But it's interesting because I'm thinking about it and I'm going, if this happens in a personal conversation, can you imagine what's happening in meetings?
Yeah, well, and a lot of that, I have found that a lot of the well-being related activities within the corporate structure are performative. Yeah. And they aren't actually things that help people. So for instance, if I have seen examples of this and have experienced it myself, let's have a you matter day or wellness day, whatever it is.
Yeah.
But you still have all of the same requirements for work that week. And, there's still all the same systems in place. So, what we found was unless you remove those, and there are simple all the way to more complex things organizations can do to support well-being for their employees and not just do it lip service by offering, an app that nobody actually uses. Like they can put it in the reports like, oh, we're doing this, or maybe they get some statistics or things from it. But, even simple things like having meet less Mondays or, focus Fridays where there aren't any meetings. The research actually shows those types of things are much more powerful. And I'll give you another example. One of the things I noticed when I moved from the East Coast to the West Coast was how East Coast centric the corporations were, or at least all of the groups that I was working with. And that resulted in me having meetings at like 5 and 6 a.m. Here in the San Francisco area. And then in the same regard, I've been on global teams where it was either very New York or very London centric. And, you were just out of luck if you were in Asia or somewhere else like that. So some of the techniques I've seen people use, like from a systemic standpoint, are actually having that emotional intelligence and that empathy to realize, who the audience is, who the grouping is. And in one case, we knew that a particular client needed to have global representation, sort of 24/7 type of thing. And you could do that with a team in the US, but you're going to burn everybody out. So what we did instead, Ava, was we actually found colleagues, because we were a global business, we found colleagues to be at different spots around the world. And we essentially passed the baton during the day so that the client had their needs met. But we weren't expecting that our team was going to be working, all hours of the night and weekend and whatever else to support that global client during that launch. And to me, that's an example of taking the well-being of your employees into consideration and enabling a system that helps to support that.
See, that's actually a really good way of doing it, I think, too. And I had not ever really considered that. And I've worked with global teams. I don't know that we ever considered the baton approach, but that's actually very smart. And hopefully some of the listeners can have some takeaways from that, too. That's a very intelligent approach to getting around burnout. And I can relate to what you're saying, being a West Coast new person. I am finding that I did not realize how East Coast centric. I mean, you feel it when you're on the East Coast, obviously, but you don't really, you're kind of spoiled. And so then you move to the West Coast and you're like, oh my God, oh, there's London time. Oh, there's Asia time. Oh, there's Eastern Standard Time. Oh my God. And then what about like Chicago? And
Yes. That's an opportunity, right? Where we can show how we value our employees and others by thinking about that proactively. So if you have a national team or a global team, thinking about, well, what are the ways you could break down some of those barriers? I know with another client we were working with, if they were a national client, we actually made sure that the meetings we would have were within a window that worked both on the East Coast and the West Coast, which here meant we were meeting from 9 a.m. to 2 p.m. And we wouldn't do meetings before that or after that. And that also, is where we can have an influence on our clients as well. Because I know that, or at least in my experience, Ava, clients were more stressed out than even the colleagues and others we would have. So it's about finding that balance and being proactive and using that emotional intelligence to be thoughtful around that type of thing. So we could do with a little bit more of that in the world, I think. Well, today's National Kindness Day, so it is thinking about kindness a little bit more as well.
Yes, we definitely need to be a bit more kind, I think, to our teams in that regard, and hopefully everyone listening can take something away from that. It's interesting to just kind of zooming out a little bit.
Yeah.
Because this isn't just about long hours or Slack pings at midnight.
Yes.
I think we both agree that burnout is a design flaw. Obviously, not a personal failure. So what are the structural things inside tech companies that make burnout almost inevitable? And I know we could really drill into this one, but I'm curious, what's top of mind for you when you think of, you know, the things that tech companies are doing that are making this inevitable?
So I guess the approach I would take to this is thinking about the research I've done on preventing burnout.
Yep.
And they're like the top three areas that have the most support and research behind them in terms of having a significant impact are getting quality sleep, having boundaries and breaks, and having good social connection. And so when I think about a corporation and sort of what they're doing to infringe upon those things, that's kind of where I would probably focus, Ava. So if you're expected to be on call 24/7, and because we have, our computers and our cell phones and other things like that, when we don't have those boundaries and breaks to get that quality sleep or to go out for a night with friends or to connect with our loved ones at home, that just exacerbates the burnout and stress that you have. So to me, that would be a little bit of the antidote. So one of the practices I would do is, even though I might have an email or I might be working on something after our typical office hours, I would wait and schedule that to be sent in the morning. So those on the East Coast would not be getting a ping in the middle of the night or something else like that. So I think it gets down to leaders and managers modeling good behavior in terms of taking having boundaries and taking breaks and leaving enough time and room for people to do those other things in their life. So, and I can dive deeper into anything you want, but those are the ones that come to mind that we know will influence our ability to be resilient in the face of stressors, which are going to be there and are going to come. If we can get that 7 to 9 hours of sleep, if we can have even micro breaks during the day where we're taking even just 5 minutes to go outside and take a walk or look at a tree, that reduces our cortisol level and adrenaline and makes us more, gives us more ability to handle stress. And those social connections, I have found that when people are stressed and overworking, and I did this myself, the sleep and the social connections are often the first things to go.
Yes.
So, and certainly you're not taking any boundaries and breaks. And what's sad about that is those are the antidote to the stressors that are being caused at work. So when you lose the ability to have those functioning properly, it's a double whammy. So
yes, that must be when we start eating.
Oh, well, and there's all kinds of, I have a whole workshop that talks about, how you build resilience and thrive, even when we're in stressful situations. And there's a whole list, I should share it with you. There's a whole list of different coping mechanisms, and some are more supportive of our well-being than others. And as someone who started a social club called the Martini Society, which I think in my heyday of being burnt out all the time was sort of my antidote, I got the social connection, which was great.
Yeah.
Some of the other effects, like the lack of sleep, perhaps, and alcohol and eating and everything else, like those were probably less helpful coping mechanisms. But they were there.
Half it doesn't one, half it doesn't know the other. It's fine. It's fine.
Yeah. Yeah, I was just thinking about that the other day. Like, it had benefits and not benefits. So
best of times and the worst of times.
Yeah, exactly.
What I'm wondering is, do you think, and I'm sorry, this one's going to make you think a little bit probably, but are we dealing with broken incentives like constant growth pressure or like the hero founder myth? I know.
Yeah, I have some strong feelings. I'm trying to think of how best to articulate this. So I do think that there is a certain energy and a certain vibe for founders, right? I've met a lot of founders over the years. I myself am a founder. I actually think you need to be a little bit odd to decide to be a founder, right? It's hard. There's a lot of hurdles, a lot of obstacles, a lot of anxiety, a lot of stressors, a lot of different bits and pieces and things you need to pull together to make that work. And I think I do believe those are actually skills people can learn. But the people that gravitate to that type of work, I'm just going to go out on a limb here and say, I think that they are likely the type of people who are maybe prone to overwork already, right? Because you know going in, and when I think about the what is it, the hero's journey, right? You know, once you start things, you're going to be in this state where you have a lot of challenges off the bat that you need to overcome. And a lot of people, I think, might come into that feeling they need to do that alone, which not only perpetuates their own burnout, and they wear that as a badge of honor, right? Everybody talks about it. I was at a talk where somebody talked about how they worked nights and weekends and holidays, and they didn't see their family for 3 years. And all I could think of was how sad that is. But what that founder didn't share was that they had all of their housing taken care of. And they had a nest egg from the previous company that they had that sold for more than $1 million.
Oh, how nice that must be.
So they talk about the crunch and the grind and everything else. And I'm here thinking, you know, I know these other things about them, you know, like, well, you didn't have to worry about paying for rent. You didn't have to, you know, worry about X, Y, Z. So you had people helping you in other ways. And I was a little dismayed that they didn't acknowledge that support system that existed.
Right.
And I think that there is this kind of pull yourself up by your bootstraps and like go it alone, and this kind of hero, like we called it a dive and save sort of thing in the corporate world, when you have someone come in and they would just fix everything and it would be amazing, and they might have worked like 60 hours straight to try to get it done. And I just, this is not a culture that I want to be a part of. And I'm choosing to run my company in a different way. And I've been meeting more and more founders, Ava, that also want to push against this burnout hustle culture. And we believe it starts from the very beginning when you're pulling your company together and how you operate. So like, I'll give you an example. I hired a social media strategist and other things to help me launch my YouTube channel and other things. And she wrote to me and she's like, oh, like I didn't get a chance to get to this today. I'm going to work on it tonight and over the weekend, and I'll make sure that I get it to you by Sunday. And I told her to stop. And I said, look, I am not, this is not on fire. I appreciate your focus and other things. I'm not even going to look at this until Tuesday because of all the meetings I have on Monday. So don't spend your night and weekend unless you want to. If that's how you work, that's your energy and vibe. Because I'm one of those late night owls. Like I work better, a little bit later in the day. Maybe I might have an idea at 2 a.m. and get up and like write and do that. But that's my choice. It's not something being imposed on me by someone else. So I think it starts from that place. And I would like to see a generation of companies that are thinking about that from the beginning. And yeah, that's what I'm trying to do, Ava. I'm trying to make sure we have the skills and resources and support and other things in place as founders and entrepreneurs to make that a potential reality, especially because there are plenty of large corporations that do think about their employee well-being, that do have better systems and things in place and are successful. So I think we need to lift more of those stories up.
I believe so too. I think there are some that are very much doing it well. And honestly, what this was reminding me of, just sitting here in the moment, sometimes, and I won't go on a tangent on this, but just as a brief note, I was thinking about the fact that, the current hustle culture that we have, I don't think a lot of and I say younger folks, but I mean, when I say that, what do I mean? Because we're in the Bay. What I mean is, if you're not a millennial or older, you may not know that back in what is it, Skye? The 40s and 50s, there was a very distinct, I guess now we would call it a hustle culture. But back then it was with things like industries like coal miners, right?
Yes.
Where they had this massive burnout. It was like in banking and
Yes.
coal mining, where there were men that would be at work for like 10 hours, and then they would come home and they would eat dinner with their families, and they would go right back to doing some work, and they'd go to their studies until bedtime. And it
Yeah.
was this whole big thing. And I remember, not to be morbid, but I believe that the rates of like depression and suicide were very relatively high during that time. And I don't think a lot of people now that are, these big tech entrepreneurs may not even be aware that that was a thing not so long ago. And
and we fought so hard for the 5-day work week and the 40-hour work week, and for, being able to take a lunch break. And there's, my husband reminds me all the time about, like, you're entitled to that time to take a break, to eat lunch and things. And yeah, it's fascinating. I think that, we can have short memories for things. And so conversations like this can maybe be reminders. And I think, I know from a behavior change standpoint, again, because as a behavior scientist, that's going to be the lens that I put on a lot of the time, is when we're looking at sort of shifting behaviors. One of the most powerful ways we do that is through narrative frameworks or storytelling. So I think a lot of the media and stories and other things out there are perpetuating this one way of doing things, this one way of being successful. And what we need as an antidote to that are the stories that show the opposite of that, like show where and how you can be successful. And it might be that your, I just have a J curve in my head, like your productivity and sort of your curve might look a little bit different, but we know from the research that it's actually going to be more sustainable and long-lived if you approach it that way. So yeah, you're right. We might need a little exploration into some of the history of things, because we very quickly forget the rights and the things people fought for and died for. And if we don't keep those top of mind, or if we don't sort of show the other paths people can take, they're just going to kind of follow down the path that they know and that everybody talks about. And so it's why I'm glad we're having this conversation, is, and have more conversations like this around doing it differently.
Absolutely. And it's interesting too, because that kind of touches on another thing I was going to ask, which was, when we think about burnout and the onus that we put on ourselves as employees, as entrepreneurs, as individuals, how much of burnout is driven by our inability or unwillingness to accept limits? Is this fundamentally about confronting limits? Because a lot of the time, to be fair to these companies who we kind of have beat down just a little bit, to be fair to them, a lot of the time it is the employees themselves who are like, kind of like you gave the example of your social media manager. You know what? I'm going to burn through my weekend and I'm going to get this done. And there's nothing wrong with that. That's actually a very team mindset. And I think a lot of us think that way, but then you have to look at it and go, wait a minute. So if I'm burned out, how much of this is about me just being unwilling to have a limit, or being uncomfortable verbalizing that, or making that known to my team?
Yeah, I mean, that's absolutely a facet of this, is understanding and knowing what our own limits are, what our own needs are. And I have found that a lot of people haven't had the time or opportunity to even think that way, Ava, right? So I'll have people do an energy audit, for instance, and think about, well, what are the things in your day-to-day that bring you energy? What are the things that take energy? And what does that balance look like? And maybe the balance, works well for you right now, but won't work well as we, get to, the holidays, or, an upcoming event that you have. And I just think a lot of, it's not a skill, and it is a skill. It is not a skill that most people learn either in school or on the job, unless it's something that is modeled for them, or it's something that they explore themselves. I mean, it wasn't for me. I would have been the first person to tell you I would do the performative, work nights, weekends, and all that. And that was rewarded, right? With promotions, with awards, with other types of things. So that's difficult to not bring into the mix. So I don't know that there is a simple answer. I think that it's two-tiered, right? We know from a behavioral standpoint that shifting things in our environment is what will most likely have an impact on us maintaining a sustained behavior. So if we want people to come to work rested, creative, innovative, like being highly productive and all of those things, how can we support that in a proactive way versus just kind of like sweeping it under the rug and like, oh, they seem like they're doing all right, like they're doing great work. Like,
right.
I think a lot of times we don't know how much more creative or innovative or energized somebody could be because we've never seen it. We're just kind of accepting the status quo. And status quo bias is one of the most difficult biases to get over. And it takes focus and intention to overcome that bias that we all encounter as a part of this.
I would agree with that. It's funny. I think about this and, some quick takeaway thoughts for me that I'm having are, sometimes, honestly, it feels like tech CEOs think burnout is just like some fancy term for employee engagement. And really, I hope that, I know most of them are not listening to my podcast or maybe
your don't sell yourself short, Ava. It could be.
We're getting there.
But I send it to them.
Well, they're probably reading the title and going, "Oh God!" But but the reality is, I really wish, it is my wish for 2026, if I could make an early New Year's wish, that some of these individuals, or maybe maybe it's not the CEOs, maybe it's the heads of HR. Maybe it's the people managers who are going, okay, wait a minute. And they're blowing the whistle on this. And they're getting with the CEOs and going, hey, we have all these employee engagement initiatives and we've all have seen all the apps and all the things and all the perks and all the points and all the kudos. But here's the problem. So they're still burned out. So what do you want to do? Okay, so that's part 1. Part 2 is next week. It gets better, I promise. Or worse, depending on how you feel about existential workplace dread. But we do start the work at resolving it. Either way, thanks for being here. We'll see you next week. The Incognito Mode podcast is produced by Ava Jones, me. Subscribe on Spotify, Apple Podcast, or wherever you listen. New episodes drop every week.